Hello and welcome to the Property Investors Academy podcast. My name is Ben in the UK.
And I'm James, living in Hong Kong.
Okay, James, so I've got a few items listed here of reasons why people want to get involved in investment in the UK. But first of all, I want to talk about the difference in the attitude from the investors based in the UK and investors based abroad and overseas. Obviously, you're based in Hong Kong, and you deal with a lot of investors that are looking to invest in the UK from abroad. What are the characteristics of those people? What do you think?
Typically, they're of high net worth. They're also on an expatriate contract, which means they've got a lot of disposable income. A lot of the people here would be looking to get a foothold in the UK market for when they finish their time living in Hong Kong and look to move back to the UK.
What about overseas investors that aren't perhaps UK nationals? Thinking about China and Southeast Asia, and they're actually what are their reasons for looking at the UK?
So a lot of people in China and Hong Kong right now are concerned about the political climate. The housing crisis here is a significant one. The price of buying property here in Hong Kong is extreme, and it's hard for people to get on that ladder. So a lot of people here in Hong Kong who have that disposable income are looking for options like property investment in the UK.
So the first item that I've got on my list is people looking to supplement their current income. And so I know a lot of people here in the UK, if they are in a job where they're earning good money or they've been able to save a bit of money, actually the thought of investing that money into a property that they can rent out and actually increase the amount of disposable income that they've got. A friend of mine who basically he funds his holidays with an investment property, so he lives at a higher standard of living because of it, and he's got a bit more disposable income because he's got this property that he's renting out. And that's one of the reasons why people get involved. Just the extra holiday, or the sports car or something like that,
yeah.
And they fund that by owning one property.
Yeah, right. I mean, who wouldn't want an extra holiday? For me personally, investment back in New Zealand is a particular difficulty because of the amount of deposit that you have to put down on new build. The situation in the UK seems very, very attractive in terms of the fact that even as a foreign investor, the lending criteria is a whole lot more relaxed.
Sure. I mean, a lot of the lending in the UK is based on, if it's an investment property, is based on the yield, the rental yield that you're going to get from it, rather than your income as such. Because obviously, if the bank is confident that you're going to get the same income and more from the property, there's no reason not to lend you the money.
And what was it that you were saying the minimum deposits were in the UK for those kind of lending criteria?
Well, there are even packages for mortgages for if you find a property that you want to renovate and you can see an increase in the value above what you're paying for it. There's even certain lenders that will give you a double loan. So you get the loan to purchase the property at the beginning, to do the renovation, and then a remortgage at the end of it, all in one thing. So potentially you're looking at 0% deposit. Obviously that is special cases, but the majority you're looking at, you should be able to get 75%, 80% loan to value.
Has it always been so easy, or is that more of a recent development?
This actually the thing that I was talking about, that's actually very recent. It's only in the last few months that's been available, and the market's changing all of the time. So in a couple of months' time, it may not be available anymore.
Right.
So it's definitely, but the opportunities are there. And if you find the property that you want to invest in and everything else, then you speak to a mortgage advisor, and you'll get the best deal that's available at that time.
Now, some people like to treat investment property as an opportunity to run their own business. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a couple of people that I know. One of them's he's a retired racing driver, and he basically looking for something to do. He got involved in property investment. He loves the idea of being a landlord, helping people out. I mean, a lot of people you talk to, and you'll know this. Many people you talk to, you say, "How's work?" And they'll be, "Oh, I absolutely hate it. I can't stand it." And if it's not the job, it's the boss.
Yeah.
They hate the boss. They hate the manager. They just want to get away. And so, if they've got a little bit of money, and it's less than people perhaps think, there is an opportunity there to buy a couple of properties. And create a job for you where you don't have to deal with that boss. You don't have to deal with those colleagues. You don't have to deal with those customers. You can actually be your own boss and actually make really good money with not, there is an amount of work, but it's certainly, you wouldn't expect to be working 45, 50 hours a week. So, it's a nice option instead of having to be accountable to the normal work situation.
But then on the flip side of that, with investment property, there is the opportunity to be completely hands-off with those investments, aren't there? You can have the option of handing all of those investments to a property manager and being able to sit back and enjoy your time at the beach.
Absolutely, and there's a word of caution on that, and that is, I was talking to a friend of mine, and he's in that position. He is completely financially free. He's got over £1 million worth of properties. It's more than he needs to live. And he said, there's only so much golf you can play. So he got absolutely bored and fed up with it, even to the point of getting into depression. So what he says to people, if that's what you want, what you need to do is have a focus that is other than doing nothing.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of guys that I know. This amazing guy, he's a barrister. And he's now got this property portfolio, and what he does now, because the legal aid situation in the UK has changed drastically, and there isn't really the money to help vulnerable people get legal help. And what he does now, he's started a charity which he runs and donates his time to actually offer legal advice to people that need it and can't afford it. But that's based solely on the idea that he's got this property portfolio behind him.
Yeah.
So he is financially free, and he wants to give back. Another person that I know who he's looking to sail around the world. He's got this goal. That's what he wants to do, and property is what's funding that. And also, from his perspective, having it completely managed, completely hands off, that leaves free to do that. But obviously, there's another guy that I know who loves the what are they called, the Formula One for motorbikes.
Right, the MotoGP. Yes,
he loves that, and he spends his time following all the races around the world. And so, yes, you can be financially free, but I think even with that, you've got to have a goal of what you want to actually do with your time, rather than I want to do nothing, because that'll be miserable. Okay, fantastic. So the other big thing that I've noticed, I don't know, in the customers that you've talked to, is this idea of preparing for retirement.
Right. Always a touchy subject. Always something that people are a little bit wary of, don't know what to expect, a little bit scared of maybe not being able to provide for themselves in old age.
Sure, absolutely. And I know, there are pensions, which obviously, from a tax perspective, the government is encouraging people to get involved with pensions, putting money in there tax-free, so that they're saving for their retirement. And in the UK, you're not actually allowed to use that money to invest in property. Although some people have an alternative view, and they see property as their pension, even though they don't get the tax benefits of that. That's here in the UK. Is that the case in Hong Kong?
In Hong Kong, there is a pension scheme, but as you said, there are limitations on what you can spend that pension on. And since property in Hong Kong is so expensive, it is a little bit of an issue that is in the back of people's minds. So I think to be able to have the option to invest in markets like the UK, where you can get quite a decent rental return, takes a bit of the pressure off people's minds who are local and live here and don't have potentially the opportunity to go live elsewhere. I have heard of a thing where when you have your own home plus 3 other investment properties, you can create an environment where your retirement is taken care of. Those are the base criterias of becoming financially free in your retirement is owning your own home, mortgage free, plus 3 investment properties. Have you heard about that?
Yeah, I've heard about that. But I think that it depends on what standard of living you're after. So what we do when we have a meeting with somebody new, we'll actually take them through the process of, what money that they need to live in retirement, and then also what money they would need for the lifestyle that they want. Yeah. So if you've got a minimum, this is what I need to survive, and then actually an aspirational thing. Actually, if I had this amount of money, then I could, follow the motorbike around the world or whatever it is. And then you can actually work back from that figure to work out what you need. And as you say, in most circumstances, if you own your property and you've got 3 others, that more than covers your living expenses.
You're going to be living at a pretty high standard of living if you can meet that kind of goal and that criteria.
And the thing is, because people don't think about it, they don't realise actually how little they're getting from their pension. Actually, if you sat down and you looked at, okay, I'm investing this amount from my wages every year into my pension, and then I've got, at the end of that process, how much money am I actually going to have to live on? And I was talking to one person, and he didn't realise actually he was, although he'd been paying into a pension, he was only due to have maybe £200 a month from it, and that isn't a realistic amount of money to have any kind of lifestyle.
What kind of age do you think you'd be wanting to look at pre-planning for your retirement? I mean, it's one of those numbers that you can't really put on paper. But if you're a young person thinking about the distant future, what kind of time frame do you think you need to be able to create that situation?
Well, the earlier the better. I actually remember my first job when I was just out of college. I worked as a customer service rep on the railway. It was rail freight, and one of my first days in the office, one of the guys from the yard came up and introduced myself, and he was like, "Have you got your pension sorted?" Literally, have you got your pension sorted? And I'm like, I'm 18. What do I need a pension for? And he said, what time do you go to lunch? So I told him. He said, I'm going to come up here, and we're going to go together, and we're going to go see the HR department, and we're going to sign you up for the company pension. You will thank me later. Yeah. And that's a great attitude. If you're 18 and you're started working, that's the best time to think about your pension. A bit earlier you can do it, the better. But from a realistic point of view, it's a balance of the money that you've got available against what you want to achieve. So if you're not earning very much at all, you're going to need a longer period. Whereas actually, if you're managing director of an international bank and you're earning 7 figures, then you could actually put something together within 3 or 4 years that would be able to support you going
Let's
forward.
Let's talk about your average property investment. How long do you think it would take for your average investment property to be paid off and have that mortgage paid off using the rental income to pay it off?
Right. Well, that all depends. I mean, what we look for when we're getting involved with property is you look at what you're trying to achieve with the property. So if you're and how long you've got to achieve that. So if you're close to retirement, what you're really after is maximizing the amount of rent returns that you get from the property. Yeah. Whereas actually, if you've got 20 years or whatever, you're actually better off going for a strategy which is based on the growth of that property. Right. So because actually it's going to be the value of the property in 20 years' time rather than the amount of money that you're getting from it at the moment. But although you've got those two strategies, you're actually getting both from both of them anyway. So, you know, if you're going for a yield strategy, you're still going to get growth in that property. And if you're going for a growth strategy, you're still going to get that yield. As far as timescales, it's not something I've really looked into. I think I did this on a spreadsheet one time, but yeah, I'd have to look it up to be able to look at that. But you know, either way, the way that another helpful way of looking at it is maybe to say, if you've got part of that house is owned outright, and part of that is borrowed against. Yeah. So if you're getting 10% yield over the value of the property, a percentage of that you own. So let's say you own 50% of it, and you're getting 10% on that 50%. Now the other 50%, you're paying mortgage. Let's say you're paying 5%. Yeah. So that means you're getting a 10% yield on what you own, and a 5% yield on what you don't own. Yeah. So so with that, now that money could be going back in to pay off that section that you don't own, to reduce it to make your 10% return higher, if that makes sense. Yeah. It's a little bit complicated. It's easier if I draw it. Maybe I should do some slides and explain it. But the idea is, you know, whatever money that you've got, if you own 20% of a property outright and you're borrowing on 80%, that money, you're getting the same returns on that section, maximum returns on that section, and the bigger you can make that section, the more you're maximizing your returns. But if you say, okay, I want to own everything 100%, you're actually losing out on extra income, although it's at a smaller rate. Yeah. So it's balancing those two things out and making sure you're maximizing the money that you're returning on your money, plus the extra money that you can make by borrowing. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, 100%. How much of a motivation do you think creating a legacy is with investment property?
Well, this is the thing. It's a double-edged sword, this one. You know, people love to have something for the kids. I've got kids myself. I want to make sure that when I'm gone, it's not all sad, that they get a little bit of pleasure as well with something that I can leave for them.
So that would be more focused on a buy to hold strategy rather than, you know, a short-term gain. That's absolutely a long game buy to hold strategy.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, as a rule of thumb, you're expecting properties to double every 7 to 10 years. Yeah. So if you can buy something now for £100,000, you'd expect in 10 years' time it to be 200. But 20 years' time, you'd expect that to be 400. Yeah. Because it's doubling every 10 years. So the longer you've got, longer amount of time that you've got, the more money you're actually going to make on a growth strategy. But yes, the other issue with legacy and leaving it to your kids is actually you know, death taxes, inheritance taxes, and actually.
Yeah, I've heard that's a big issue in the UK in terms of people's legacies being diminished or not being able to be passed on to their kids because of the taxation laws.
Well, it is true if you haven't dealt with it. It's kind of like the pension issue. The sooner you can plan for it, the better off you're going to be. And it's the same with inheritance tax. I have a friend of mine who does wealth management, and he says, you know, as far as he's concerned, inheritance tax is a voluntary tax. Yeah. So there's always a way around it if you've got
if you put those safeguards in place.
Exactly, and it's just a case of planning for it properly and getting the proper advice. If you just leave it, then you maybe end up in trouble. But actually, if you've got a financial advisor who's worth his salt, you know, you should be able to sort that out going forward.
Now, Ben, being in the UK, can you tell me a little bit about the overview of the UK characteristics in investment property?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's obviously when you're looking at, if you've got money to invest and you want to invest in property, and you're living, somewhere where you're not really comfortable investing in your local economy, you want to look around the world and say, well, actually, where do I want to put my money?
Yeah.
So as far as the UK is concerned, there's an awful lot going for us here. There's a growing population here in the UK. There's a housing shortage. There's also social changes which have been going on over the last few years, where there's been less and less family, or the breakup of family means that actually you've got a lot more households with the population. The UK is an island, so it's land is at a premium. And actually, if you look at the figures from a point of view of population per square mile, the UK actually has the highest population per square mile of any of the G8 or major European countries. Okay. And the key thing, you put all that together, that all sounds great, but the thing that we touched on at the beginning, why wouldn't you invest where you are? Well, as far as economic and political stability, the UK is second to none when you look at it historically, compared to the rest of the world. So you've got all of these advantages all come together to create this really great market for property prices going forward. Yeah. James, as far as people looking at an investment, why would they look at property as opposed to, for instance, gold or shares, stocks and shares, all of these other things that you can do? What's the attraction?
I think that property isn't as affected by global changes as, say, stocks and shares. It's very volatile, and right now we've got a bit of a trade war going between China and the US, which means that the whole market is very, very volatile. Now, property isn't affected in the same way. The reason why property isn't affected as much as global markets is that it's a basal need. People need to live somewhere. So
and also the fact is people understand property, and people understand it's bricks and mortar. People live in it. If people don't know about investing, they're not going to be keen to put their life savings into something they don't understand. Whereas property, everybody's got a place to live, and even with the markets, one of the great things, you talk about, stock markets going up and down, and obviously there is a little bit of that in the housing market, but what people don't realize is that those two things balance out, because you've got, in effect, when you buy a property, you're running in two markets. You're running in the property market, which is the property as an asset, which is your growth going up and down with the property cycle, but having a general upward trend. But you're also in the property as a service, because you're also renting out to a tenant. So we know, if we talk about the basics of economics being supply and demand, when supply goes up, prices go down. When supply goes down, prices go up. So if you're looking at it from a growth point of view, if the price goes down of the property as an asset, what does that mean?
It means that the supply goes up.
But you've got this situation where you can't create new land, you can't create new housing.
No.
So it doesn't work in the same way that it would in that balance.
Yeah.
So if prices are going down, it just means that demand for those properties is going down. So that's not the demand for housing. That's demand to buy property. So if you're not wanting to buy a property, you still need to live somewhere. So if you're not gonna buy, what are you gonna do?
You're gonna rent.
Exactly.
Do you think that's why the UK is quite strong? Because quite a lot of people are actually looking to buy, and so the shortage of it means that since they can't buy, they have to rent.
Yes, that exactly. And so if there's a shortage of something and you have to rent because you don't want to buy or you can't buy, what's going to happen to the rental prices?
Goes up.
It goes up. So either way, if your price of your asset is growing, you're gaining.
Yeah.
If the price is dropping, you're gaining in the rental incomes.
Yeah.
So whatever the market's doing, you can't lose. You're still going to. So from an investment point of view, if you're investing in shares, if the share price goes down, that's because the dividend's gone down.
Yeah.
In effect, if it was the property market limited PLC, it would be a case of if your share value goes down, your dividends go up.
Yeah.
Which is it's the opposite to what the market's doing. So
it's really interesting how property works like that, how it adjusts to inflation accordingly. So
yeah, exactly.
If the demand, if the environment is such that price of everything goes up, your rental income slides on a sliding scale with that, and same in the other direction. So you're always going to be sitting in a bit of a pretty place in terms of where the market is.
Yeah, we have. I mean, the only way that it would change was actually either something happened and half the population died, or they doubled the amount of housing, which isn't going to happen. I mean, even here, I live down on the south coast, and we've got a really big issue with the quality of the water.
Yeah.
These kind of microorganisms in the seawater, which has actually been caused by the housing, the amount of housing that's down here.
By overpopulation.
Sorry?
By overpopulation.
Yes. So even to the point now where they put a ban on any planning permission for new homes in the local area until they've been able to figure out how to solve this issue.
And that effect on the rental prices in your area has been what?
Well, this is quite a new thing, so it won't have an impact. There's quite a long tail as far as the impact that will have. But the point I'm trying to make here really is, there is a limit to the amount of housing that you're going to get, and there's going to be you'll never be able to meet the demand of a growing population here in the UK. I guess really what I'm trying to say is, as far as investments go, you can't find a safer investment than property, regardless of what goes on in the economy at large.
So then I guess it comes down to a little bit of research into where you invest in the UK. And in the UK at the moment, it seems like there's a huge amount of growth in places like Manchester, in Liverpool, and in Birmingham. Why are those areas such hotspots for growth?
It's a good question, and really, it comes down to this, demand issue. You've got the London market has been, kind of with foreign investors and lots of people buying to let and those kind of things. House prices have got to a point where they're kind of stagnating. They've reached the peak of where they're at.
Yeah.
So we're looking at places that in places up in the north where there's still there's been a huge amount of investment, regeneration money gone into these places to create jobs and
corporate relocation as well, right?
Exactly. I mean, like in Manchester, they've spent a lot of money to move big corporations into Manchester, and again with Liverpool's had a lot of money spent on regeneration, improving the transport infrastructure, these kind of things, so that the demand for housing in that area goes up. And I mean, that's the key thing for when you're looking at locations for where you want to invest. Obviously, it's got to be convenient for the person that lives there to get to work, to get their kids to school, those kind of things, transport to get around, and when
the attractiveness of those locations, increases with the new development that's going on there, that motivates buyers to purchase in those areas, right?
Exactly, and I mean most of the property that we've dealt with, as you know, James, most of it goes to investors, and once it's sold, it doesn't come back onto the market for years and years and years.
Yeah.
Just because if you meet the criteria for a good investment property, the longer you can hold on to it, the more money you're going to make. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely, and as with all of these things that we've talked about, if you actually know the information, and talk to people, talk to people that know what they're talking about, get professional advice, you're going to maximize, your returns, throughout. And it's not necessarily to say, okay, invest in Manchester, you'll be fine. It's actually looking for the locations in Manchester that are the best for growth going forward, and Liverpool. But yeah, I mean, that's the key thing. You're looking for places where there's regeneration going on or planned going forward, because that will automatically raise the value of the properties going forward.
Why is the UK market so easy to understand compared to other places where investment's going on? Why is the UK so much easier to understand?
I think for me, it's basically comes down to stability.
Yeah.
Because you've got these, historically you can look at all of the figures. You're not expecting major changes in there's not going to be a revolution. There's not going to be anything like that. The economy is one of the big powerhouses of the world. So you've got this situation of stability, so you can see what's going on. You know what's going to happen in the future. There's no question, no questions about that. Even with the economy going into recession and going into growth periods, you can look at that historically, and you can actually say and predict, okay, this is what we expect to happen, and not 9 times out of 10 you'll be right. So as I say, that's really
I think because of that stability, it's what makes the UK so attractive for foreign investors, like people here in Asia and in Hong Kong, is the fact that the market is so much easier to understand. The language is understandable. The people are quite similar as well. Whereas other places in Europe, there's some quite complex social structures going on and the like.
It's the other thing, and actually, it's a good point. The legal, obviously, where you've got the former Commonwealth, not former Commonwealth, former colonial colonies and everything.
And Commonwealth law still going on here.
Yes, indeed. So Commonwealth countries, their legal system has either been based or has been heavily influenced by the British legal system.
Yeah.
And so those things are, we have across those cultures a general understanding. Whereas actually, if you go to France or you go to Germany or somewhere like that, their legal system and the way that they do things is very, very different.
Yeah.
So not to say that. I mean, when I did law at university, one of my lecturers used to say, when we talked about European law, he'd say, well, the French, what can they teach us? But actually, you see like the USA, Canada, Hong Kong, a lot of these, Australia, New Zealand,
yeah,
they're all based on the British system.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot easier to perhaps navigate than a completely different system.
Ben, let's talk about regular yields with investment property.
Yeah, and no, definitely. I think this is one of the things, and when we talk about growth and yield, if you've got a property and you've got somebody, a tenant in place, you have got a regular income, unless they leave. And how do you guarantee that they won't leave?
Yeah.
And the way that you do that is you make sure it's in the right location. So if you've got a location which is convenient for everything that need, jobs, utilities, schools, if it's on a transport link into the city centre, If you've got those things in place, you're always going to be able to find a tenant.
People are going to want to stay, and that means that your rental income is going to be very stable.
Exactly. And so if you've got that, guaranteed, I mean, there's also ways to increase it. Obviously, we've generally talked in this podcast. We've generally talked about buy to let.
Yeah.
But there's other ways of making money out of property and increasing your return. HMOs, service accommodation, all of these other strategies to increase those yields. And it's finding the right property for the right strategy to make sure you're not going to have void periods, and you're going to end up with maximizing the amount of money you can get from those properties.
We touched on it a little bit earlier in this podcast, but what about the borrowing situation for investment property?
Sure. Well, here in the UK, normally what is standard is to say that you need to cover your mortgage payments by 125%. So if your rent is covers your mortgage payments plus gives you 25%, normally they'll give you the mortgage.
Okay.
And to be quite frank, if you're buying a property, to invest, if you're buying an investment property and you're not getting 25% over your mortgage payments, you're buying the wrong property. Yeah, exactly. So any decent investment property is going to give you that kind of figure. And provide.
I was going to say, sorry, before I interrupted you there, I was going to say, who are the people that are making those valuations and making those decisions on the lending and the borrowing criteria?
They would be your estate agents and surveyors.
Okay.
So they would come in and they would give you a market appraisal. These would, it would be independent, done by your mortgage company. They would get someone to come out and say, actually, yes, you're going to get £1,200 a month for this property, no problem.
Are those valuations done on the surrounding area, or are they projected on estimates?
Well, it's just about someone who understands and knows what's going on in the market.
Okay.
And that really comes down to the local expertise.
Right.
So,
So as a foreign investor, how could you have some of that security that you're going to get a loan that reflects the rental income that you are going to get? Does that just come down to a bit of research, or is it a question of consulting someone in the local area that you're looking at investing in?
Well, you have to be careful with it. Obviously, the mortgage company will get their own valuation of it. So as long as you've got a reputable advisor in the area, you won't have any problem. Because at the end of the day, if you can't get the mortgage, you're not going to buy it.
No.
And they're not going to give it to you unless you've got the rental returns, going forward. So,
So the days of rogue lending are over, are they?
Well, the whole purpose of having those rules in place was to stop people going bankrupt.
Yeah.
You get these situations where it certainly was years and years ago when lending was free and you could sometimes get 125% mortgage on a property. That's not sustainable because the market doesn't go up in a straight line continuously. It's got these drip, ups and downs as it moves up.
Yeah.
So if you've got this situation where people are thinking, yes, it's always going to go up, I'm going to take 125% mortgages on 17 houses. Suddenly the market drops, and the banks say we're not going to lend you 125% anymore. We're only going to lend you 70%, and you've got a portfolio that's worth £3.5 million. Suddenly you've got literally over £1 million to find like that and it's not going to happen. So you had this situation where a lot of investors who weren't being cautious, they weren't being sensible, were getting caught out and ending up bankrupt.
Yeah, right.
And nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. You've got to have a sensible view on lending. And providing you've got that, I mean, we recommend that people don't go higher than 70%, and ideally you want to be, 50 to 65% as an investor, because that means regardless of what happens to the market going forward, you'll always be covered. There's never any question that you would end up losing that property, because although we'd expect going forward it to rise, and it will do, if suddenly there is a crash. And there was rumours going around of a 30% crash because of Brexit. Yeah. I don't buy that. I don't think that's going to happen. But even if it did, if you're only leveraged, if your borrowing is only 70%, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
And if it's less than that,
from that, no problem.
Skin off your nose, no problem at all. Because the point is, for me, if you're getting into property for a growth strategy. You want to make sure it's safe and that nothing can happen. No matter what happens, you're still going to have your property, and it's not going to cost you anything more.
Right.
And so, providing people are sensible and don't get over. And it's one of the things I think we're going to talk about later on, is having this attitude of being stable and making your decisions without emotion.
Yeah.
And actually, basing your decisions on a logical reason. And that being backed up by the figures. So, providing you do that, you're sorted. So, James, one of the interesting things that we talked about from as far as investing in the UK from an overseas perspective, obviously for expats, particularly in places like Hong Kong, is the higher education opportunities that might create for their kids. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so from my understanding, if you live overseas but have property in the UK and can prove you have rental income from that property in the UK, you can still apply for home status even if you live overseas. Now, that's a very attractive prospect for people who live overseas, because they want to send their kids to higher education, universities, and still be afforded the same local rights that they should be accorded to.
Okay, James, it's been a really interesting conversation, and I hope that you, the listener and viewer, have enjoyed it, and we'll catch up with you guys next week.
Great, yeah, it's crazy to think we've done over an hour. Can't wait to talk about more to do with property investment from the UK perspective and from an expat perspective here in Hong Kong. Thank you very much, Ben. Thanks for the listeners, and we'll see you soon. Don't forget to like and subscribe to these videos. This is a free podcast, but we appreciate your comments. Please leave any questions or comments in the comments section below.